Welcome back to Family History Fridays with the Butler Area Public Library. I'm Margaret, and in this video, we are going to look at the 1950 census. So the 1950 census was released earlier this year after a 72-year delay, and it's not an exaggeration to say that it's probably the most anticipated record release of the year for genealogy researchers. So in this video, we are just going to take a look at the questions that are asked, how they're going to differ from some past census records, and how to make sense of some of the new abbreviations and formatting that you're going to find. So let's take a look. Okay, the 1950 census. So what's on it? We have 20 questions that are asked of every single person, so it's going to be a little shorter than the 1940 census and certainly shorter than previous years that you've seen. But we do have some extra questions that were asked of select people. Here's a preview of what the full page of a 1950 census is going to look like. So you can see we've moved back to a vertical arrangement rather than a horizontal sheet. And we can divide the types of questions that are being asked into three general categories. So the first section will be to do with the home. The next are going to be basic personal details about the people living there. And the third is going to be occupation and employment details about those people who are working. So first section first, on the left-hand side of the page, you'll find info about their home. This is going to include their street and house number, a dwelling number for the enumeration visit. So this is simply just the house being numbered in order that the census taker has visited. They're going to ask if it's a farm or a ranch, and if so, if it is 3 or more acres. Here is one example. We can see the vertical column on the far left. That's where we find our street name. So this is Negley Avenue here in the city of Butler. The next column here, house or apartment number, we can see that Lori and Margaret Patton live at 310 Negley Avenue. So that is their street address. This number 5 in the column that says dwelling number, that's just that serial number for the census enumerator. That just means they're the 5th house that was visited by the census taker. It's not a farm, they're living here in the city, and it's not more than 3 acres. Let's look at another example from a more rural location. These are folks who were enumerated in Buffalo Township in southern Butler County. Looking at the street, we can see that they live on Upper Coal Hollow Road, but we don't have a traditional house number. Instead, we have a description that the census taker has filled in to help us find the house. So in this example, Russell Kelly's home is west half a mile from Route 356 on Upper Coal Hollow Road. He was the 6th family that was visited. Yes, it's a farm, and yes, it's more than 3 acres. You will see a little skinny column here with a number in it. That has to do with folks who were on farms who were asked additional questions for an agricultural survey. Those records have not been retained, so you're not going to find a copy of that specific to any person here on the census. But for some people who were living out in more rural areas, they just will not have a house number at all. So here we have people who were living on Township Road 616. And we can see that they just simply do not have a house number written in at all. We just have the serial dwelling number to let us know what order they were visited by the census taker. Now, personal details. The first part of these will include some very basic info like their name, their relationship to the head of the house, and their age, race, and sex. So here we can see the head of the household will typically be listed first. We have Lori S. Patton, his wife, Margaret, his daughter, Patricia, and his father, Sam. We have a column with a single letter abbreviation for race, W. This household is all white. A letter code, male or female, for gender, and a number written in for their age. One thing to note with the 1950 census, if there is an infant in the household, that is noted by writing in the month that that baby was born. So in this instance, in the house of Charles Rice, their son David was born in June of 1949. So that's why we see June written in there. In previous census years, that would have been indicated by a fraction, indicating the number of months old that they were, but now we are just outright giving the month that they were born. More personal details include marital status, birthplace, and naturalization status. So here we can see a column of marital status codes, and unlike previous census years where there was usually just a single letter, these are more abbreviations. Some examples of the codes that you're going to find are MAR for married, SEP for separated, D for divorced, WD for widowed, or the one that's going to be most different from past census years, NEV, meaning never married, for anyone who is single. So instead of a capital letter S for single, everyone who is unmarried, either because they are an adult who hasn't married or they are a child, is going to say NEV. Column for birthplace will simply write out the state or country that that individual was born in. So here we see folks born in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Syria, and Czechoslovakia. For those people who were not born in the United States, there is a citizenship column here. And it's a very simple answer on this question, unlike some of the complicated codes in past year to do with the stage in the citizenship process. Here we have a simple yes or no if they've become a citizen. So this person who was born in Syria has not naturalized, but the person born in Czechoslovakia has become a citizen. You may occasionally find one third option, which is AP, meaning a person who was born overseas to American citizen parents. The third section of questions has to do with occupation and employment. These are going to be categorized by questions about employment status, the number of hours worked, and the job title and industry type that they are working in. So first thing, the occupational category. That will be the very first column that we see after the citizenship questions. You're going to see a letter code there. WK means they were working. H means that someone is involved in housework. OT means other. Maybe they're a student, maybe they've been laid off, there's some other circumstance happening here. Or a U means the person is unable to work. There's going to be a few other questions next to that regarding their recent work. So there's a question asking if they worked the week prior to the census being taken. There's a question asking that if you didn't work, were you actively looking for employment? And then another question regarding the number of hours that you worked. So here we can see the number of hours that each of these individuals worked in the previous week. So William Kloak worked 63 hours as a storekeeper. His wife worked 20 as a clerk helping in that store. And their neighbor, George Syback, worked 16 hours cleaning skates at a skating rink. So you get an idea of how much work they were doing in a week in addition to the occupation that they have. And we have a two column, just like in previous years, where we have the job that they do and then the industry within it that they are working. The last column that you'll see is worker class. That's going to be a single letter code after the occupation and industry. There's four options here. P is for private, meaning that they are working for a private industry, a private company. That's going to be most workers that you see. O means they own their own business or they're working on their own account. That's why we see an O next to William and Mary Kloak, because they own their own grocery store. You might see a G if somebody works for the government. And you might find an NP for no pay. This is for people who are working for a family business or working on a family farm. And don't worry about these miscellaneous columns that you see that are labeled code C1 and C2, or there were some code A and B earlier on. That information was not filled in by the census enumerator and was not answered by the people you're researching. These are simply places that were annotated later on when they were synthesizing all of the data on this census to get statistics done about the country. So I did mention that a few people were selected to be sampled for extra questions. So 6 people on each sheet were asked a few additional questions, and it's shifted on each page so that they are randomized and not always, the very first person on the page. Sometimes it's the 5th, 10th, 15th, etc. Sometimes it's 2, 7, 12, but you will see 6 people highlighted per sheet. You'll know that a person was selected for additional sampling if you see little tabs that stick out on each side of the row where their answers are, and it will say ask questions below. That's your cue to check the bottom of the page. So below the main information, you will see this additional table for questions for persons listed on the sample lines. There's two sections here. The section on the left was for every person, and the section on the right was for people over the age of 14. So the questions for everybody, they involve, were you living in this same house a year ago? Yes or no? Were you living on a farm a year ago? And were you living in this same county a year ago? If the answer to that answer about if you were not living in the same county was different, they will fill in where they were living before. They will ask what country your father and mother were born in. So in past years, this has been a question that was asked of every person. On the 1950 census, they only asked the parents' birthplaces for this select number of sample people. We also asked the highest grade of school that you attended. So here you'll see a code. There might be a 0 if they have not attended school at all, but usually you will see a letter number combination. If it starts with an S, that's elementary through high school. So S8 means they've gone to 8th grade. S12 means they've gone to 12th grade. If the code starts with a C, that means they've gone to college. So C3 would mean someone had gone to 3 years of college. They also ask if you finished that grade in question. So here we can see this person with an S12, they have a yes, they did finish the 12th grade. And then the final column, they ask, have you been in school since February of this year, 1950? So we have a yes or a no, or an age 30 or over for people who have aged out of the school system. For people who were 14 and older, we have some additional work-related questions, some financial questions, and a question about military service. Here we get some questions about employment in greater detail. So if they said they were looking for work last week, they ask how many weeks they'd been looking for work in total. And we asked everyone on the census page how many hours they'd worked in the previous week. If you were selected for sampling at the bottom, you are also asked how many weeks in the previous year you had worked. So here are 2 people who had worked 44 weeks out of the last year and 2 who had worked the full 52. They ask in 1949 how much money you earned in your salary, as well as any additional revenue from interest, dividends, veterans payments, pensions, rents, etc. They ask how much money your relatives in your household earned. So we have an idea of how much this one person earned and then their household as a whole. And then we have a question about the household's dividends, extra rent, and things like that. So we get a financial picture of the household in 1950. And then finally, if it's a male person on the census, we ask if they served in the US military. We have columns for World War II, World War I, or any other military service, a simple yes or no checkbox. And then one person on each page is extra special. They get pulled for extra sampling questions. And so the last person who has a sampling row gets asked a few more things to do with their marital status, their previous job, and if they're a woman, how many children they've had. So you will see here, John Kalina, he is the last sample line on this census page. And so highlighted for him across the bottom are his row of sample questions, and then this little notch at the bottom right for his additional continued sampling questions. So he was asked another question about if he was working, and there's a question that supplements it asking what you did in your previous job. So if you were not currently working, what you did in your past job and the class of worker that you were. If you are ever been married, have you been married more than once? So there's a yes or no question that might help you know if a person is on their first or second marriage. There's a question asking how many years you have been married, or if the person is widowed, divorced, or separated, how many years it's been since that event occurred. In this instance, he's been married for 2 years. And then lastly, question 38 would only apply to women, and it asks how many children that she has given birth to. And that's a question that we've seen pop up occasionally, but not consistently on previous census records. There's one other thing to keep an eye out for on the bottom of the census page. So sometimes we run into the issue where we have a household that starts close to the bottom of the page and continues on the top of the next. And so we always want to make sure we're not missing any family members who are separated onto a next page. In 1950, they very helpfully give us a checkbox that says household continued on next sheet. So you know right away if you need to turn the page and check for any children who have been separated from the rest of the family. So here we can see Lewis and Joanne Smith's family. They are enumerated together on the bottom of page 6 of this record set. Household continued is checked. And at the top of page 7 are their 3 kids, Diane, Don, and Vicky. There's also one more new thing that has been added. So sometimes you're going to see entries on a census page that says no one at home, see sheet 71, line 6, or see sheet 72, line 9. So in this instance, the census enumerator would actually mark where someone was not home as they visited the houses and then add them at the back of the page. Now that's pretty typical, but it's very, very obviously pointing out to you where they fit contextually, where it might not have been quite as obvious in previous census years, where someone who was skipped on an initial visit plugs back in. So here, if we find sheet 71 and 72 at the back of the packet, we can find out who was supposed to be enumerated here between Frank Hasey and Bernard Haley. So sheet numbers, there's a page number at the top of each census page. So here we see sheet number 28. And there's actually only 20 to 30 some sheets in each census packet. And then at the back, we get those supplemental 71 and 72 pages for the folks who weren't home to answer the door for the census. So when I'm looking at page 28, that's the last page in the main packet of the census. And the very next page is page 71. So you'll know if you see those that 71 and 72 are just the folks who they had to go back and catch on a second visit. So here we can see on page 71, line 6, the Eugene Dottler family. So this is who was not at home that first census day that would have fit in with their neighbors on the previous image. So where do we find the 1950 census? You're going to find it online. So the only place you can view it is going to be through various websites online. It's not available on microfilm. You can find it through your library system on both Heritage Quest and Ancestry Library Edition. You can obviously also find it on genealogy sites like Ancestry.com or Family Search. There is also a dedicated 1950 census site through the U.S. National Archives. So if you are searching on Ancestry.com, Ancestry Library Edition, or Heritage Quest, you will now see the 1950 census come up in your search results, just like any other record. So here we can see when I searched for Lori Patton, the 1950 census entry comes up for him right with some other census years and a find a grave entry. There is also, like every other record set on Ancestry and Heritage Quest, a dedicated search page just to search the 1950 census collection. So you can fill in a name, an age, a location, a relative's name, and search just for that one record. And your search results will look just like any other record set on Ancestry or Heritage Quest. So if you are already familiar with using those sites, you will seamlessly be able to just work on finding your 1950 records. The official 1950 census site put together by the National Archives is 1950census.archives.gov. So there you can also search the census pages for free. And there's also some really helpful resources and FAQ to really help you make the most of your research. So I recommend taking a look at it, even if you prefer to use one of the other research sites. So here's an example of all of the frequently asked questions that they have. So they have information about search tips where you can find blank copies of the question forms, questions about how Native Americans or military personnel were enumerated, questions about the enumeration districts. So if you have any other questions about the 1950 census, the National Archives is going to help you out. So I hope that this information has been helpful and that you are excited to dig in and take a look at this brand new census record made available to us, and wish you all the best on your research.